Hi everyone, Darren Hunter here with Michael Sanz. This is the Outsourced PM podcast show where we're just talking everything about property management and using virtual assistants to unbusy and unburden your team. Now, Michael, we've covered some amazing processes. We've covered how to use virtual assistants for tenancy applications, how to use them for taking leasing inquiries. And today we're going to talk about how to use virtual assistants to chase late rent, because at the end of the day, we know property managers are in a job because tenants don't pay their rent on time. And so there has to be a follow-up process. So firstly, rent arrears and late rent is one of the big issues that if we allow this to get out of control, I see it a bit like cancer. The cancer just spreads and it can get out of control. And one thing you don't want to do is have an eviction. And so I'm a real believer, it's right in that early intervention and that we're dealing with you could say as an analogy, the forest fire or the bushfire at the smoldering cigarette butt stage and stamping out a smoking cigarette butt instead of being a firefighter and using all that energy. So with that in mind, Michael, let's just talk about how can we effectively use virtual assistants for chasing late rent. Let's just start right off the cuff with the initial first follow-up in that initial early stage.
I spoke to an agency the other day, Darren, and asked them the question, how's your arrears going? They said it's pretty good. It's 8 or 9% most times. And I hear this from a lot of agencies where they think somewhere between that 6, 7, 8, 9, 10% of arrears, floating arrears is acceptable. And I think first and foremost, when you're doing arrears calls, it should never be an aggressive call from the get-go, because you don't know what the tenant has been going through. There could be a difficult situation. You don't know the reason behind it. And we often talk about that iceberg, right? You only see the top of the iceberg. You don't see the big emotional stress and pressures that are underneath, which is a majority of people that are paying rent late. Because then you get the serial late payers. So with us, we knew that if the rent is due, let's call today the first of the month. If it wasn't in our account this morning at 10 o'clock, because we didn't take cash, we didn't take bank deposits, it was always direct debit type setup, the rent wasn't in today. Our first approach was calling them friendly. Hey, Darren, Michael, IGT Realty, how's everything going? There's that light conversation. Well, the reason for my call, the rent is due to be in our account today. We haven't yet received it. I'm just about to give the owner a call and give them an update. What can I tell them when the rent will be paid? Right? Happy call, not aggressive. They may say at that point, oh, I paid it today. So, okay, no problem. Just for next time, though, the rent is due to be in our account today. If you could just pay it 1 to 2 days beforehand, that'll be in our account today, and then you won't be in arrears. Yes, the conversation can go different ways, and we have scripts and dialogues around that. But this is what we train our VAs to do when they're chasing rent arrears. It's not, hi, Darren, this is Michael from IGT Realty. You haven't paid the rent. What's happening? Right? And they're on the back foot. You don't know where they're coming from. And then, of course, a couple of days later, if it hasn't come in, then the conversation's a bit different. Hey, Darren, we spoke the other day. You said everything was okay. I'm just checking in again. Rent hasn't been received. Are you sure there's something that we can't help you with? And you start to find out what those pressures are. It could be that their pay cycle is off from when the rent is due, in which case we need to know that so we can try and do an adjustment so the rent falls, when the salary is being paid. And so that kind of gets rid of that issue for them.
We can take a bit of a back step here, Michael, because you go to most property managers and say that if the tenant hasn't paid the rent on the first day that they should be, you need to be getting on the phone the next day. A lot of property managers are immediately going to say to you, well, we haven't got time for that. We send an SMS on day 2 or 3, but they certainly won't be getting on the phone. So did you find now, I know you had an insane low level of rent arrears compared to the average office out there. And just for everyone out there measuring rent arrears, I'll just give a quick one before we go back to Michael. I certainly measured the time it takes to get a tenant to pay to arrive in the account. Back when I was doing it was 2 or 3 days. And so we would measure tenants that were 2 days or more behind. Anything more than 5% was a problem. And we wouldn't allow more than 1% of tenants more than 14 days behind. That was our KPI measure. But I know, Michael, you had a lot less than that. But you're saying you had the VAs doing those initial calls, not the property managers.
Yeah, we had like 0 arrears for 2 years. And it's because we educated, and that wasn't like, bang, happens like that. We had to educate tenants. And when we were onboarding tenants, letting them know that the rent is due on this day, so make sure you pay it on this day so it hits our account in time. And so we eradicated that issue. And when you had the serial late payers that were always like, making it a game, we killed them with kindness. And then we used strategies such as, we want to help you, we want to work with you here. One day you may want to look for another property, and we're going to give you your rent ledger, and the other agencies are going to see that it's late 1 day, 2 days, 5 days, 6 days. We want to just kind of bring that back in line, so it won't be a problem for you finding another property 1 day down the track, right? And so when you show them and demonstrate, look, we're not doing this for fun. There's no obligation there. We're trying to work with you. We want to make sure that on your next tenancy and so on, it doesn't impede what you're doing there either. So, let's find common ground. And again, it could be that we've changed the rent paid 2 days. We might change it instead of monthly to bi-monthly, right, to help them. But the idea is that we want the money. We want it coming in because the owners are due. The business runs on fees. And, if you've got 10% arrears, that's 10% of your company's income on the table.
Okay, so I could already see, just like if let's say we're gardeners, right, and we want to get rid of the weeds in the yard, it's best to spray a weed as it's just appeared as a small shoot, and instead of trying to deal with big weeds and pulling them out and all the effort that go with it. But so many offices are dealing with rent arrears before it's 7, 10, 12 days behind, and now we're just getting out of control. And no wonder why we're going to tribunal regularly and at the risk of more evictions. But if we're dealing with this thing right at its root, my goodness me, I can see the whole issue of rent arrears collapsing before our eyes.
Yeah, I think those agencies that they don't start chasing rents until 5 days, it gives me anxiety, because it's the rent is due on an agreed date. That's what we agreed on when we went into this property, sent out the lease. That was the agreed date. So what leeway do you want to give someone? The leeway should be before the rent is due. Can you make the payment now so that it hits our account then? It's Darren, people may scoff and people may say, oh, it's impossible. You can't have 0 arrears, or but we had 0 vacancy for over 2 years too, and we educated, we had strategic leases. But exactly what I did, Darren, I've helped several offices with our scripting, right? On what to say. And there was one office in New South Wales that was like 22%, and I didn't want to have any involvement with them because, I thought, no, this is just an office that doesn't want to do real estate. But they got their arrears down to like single digits, like 2 to 3% from above 20%, right? Which is just like phenomenal for them. They actually had a complaints department. They no longer have a complaints department. So we completely restructured that. We've got outsourcing staff in that company that are totally just revolutionizing and clearing up how they do business. Another agency we helped in WA, Darren, where they had double digits also, and we gave them some strategic advice, told them what to do. They got their arrears into single digits, and they hadn't had that for such a long time. And they were blaming the market for it. It's not the market, not the market. You've got to come up with arrangements. You've got to come up with plans. And, so it's your virtual staff calling on day 0 when you've got no more rents coming in that day. What's wrong with doing a courtesy call? Why can't you get onto it before it becomes an issue? Start the communication, right? That second call on day 2 or 3, that's when you start kind of turning up the heat. Why wait? Why wait to find out there's a problem?
So I guess we're dealing with the horse while it's thinking about walking over to the fence, but not chasing after the horse after it's bolted, because that's what too many officers do. So Michael, let's just go back to your stats. You said 0 arrears. You had 650 properties in Melbourne. Qualify what 0 arrears was and for how long, because that's extraordinary.
Yeah, just over 2 years, and it probably took us 12 to 14 months to kind of get the business on that pathway. And again, it was educating the current tenants, and it was making sure the new tenants that came on board were very clear about what the expectations were. We we had direct debits, right? So none of it was cash. None of it was check. You couldn't come into the office and pay. It all had to be online, and there was certain...
Which is the normal now, but I wouldn't think of an office out there still taking cash, right?
No, I mean, we can't refuse to take cash. Like, we can't reasonably refuse to take cash. But I would say to the person who has cash, the bank is around the corner, or the bank is there. This is the account number. Go and deposit the money in there. At least that'll hit our account, straight away. And then they would do that in special circumstances. Like, there were some of the tenants that were elderly and were confused about internet banking when I was making people go on to that method and direct debit. But we educated them. We created a series of videos on how to pay electronically, how to set the direct debit up, how to do all this. So we educated them, everyone. We educated them from a very early point, Darren. And I'm yet to find an agency. So reach out to me, guys, who are listening to this. I'm yet to find an agency that actively educates the tenants before they sign the lease on what the expectations are, and having them sign a memorandum, like a document, just saying they understand the rent process and how rent is transferred and processed and so on. Right? You're making them accountable. Like, these guys are adults. You are dealing with adults. You are not dealing with little kids signing leases and entering into a property agreement. They're adults. You've given them the property because they've got an income and they look like they can afford to pay the rent.
I need to still keep on screwing you down on this issue, because I'm shaking my head. I wasn't aware that you said 2 years, approximately 650 properties had no arrears. When you say no arrears, what does no arrears mean? I mean, did a tenant get to 3 or 4 days behind?
No. The rent was always paid it was in our account on the due date.
Now, okay, and I think to qualify here as well for everyone, Michael is from Victoria. Victoria has a very strong culture of monthly rents. Whereas, for example, Michael, in Western Australia, you are not even allowed to say to a new tenant, you've got to be paying monthly. It's illegal. So I know the Victorians get this bit right. And I'm assuming that you were very, very strict on calendar monthly rents. Was that correct?
Yeah, definitely calendar monthly rent. And we had rents due on the 1st and the 15th. And so if you were to move into the property on, let's say, the 10th, we did an adjustment of the 5 days or the 4 days plus the next month's rent. So the first month's rent might be a little bit higher. And then if you moved in after the 15th, you paid the month's rent plus that adjustment. And it meant that we only had rent coming in our trust account on the 1st or the 15th.
And so you had those 2 batches of time there where your VAs were absolutely looking at, all right, these are the days where we've got to be making X, Y, Z calls. And we're not spreading it out through the month. So everyone there, you can see common due dates was part of that success. But I just want to congratulate you, Michael, because I've been a teacher of zero tolerance rent control for many years. And I will admit that certainly with serial late rent offenders, we had a big stick approach. And I think you'd be the first person I've come across that could do a better job with my training system by not using a big stick. So I just want to say congratulations, because I felt that my method was the only thing that worked, and you've proven otherwise. But not only proven it but you're not using stuff on the ground. You're actually using virtual assistants, where a lot of people, Michael, have a problem with English skills. The thing about virtual assistant, well, I wouldn't want them calling tenants because of their English. I know that we've got a whole podcast, everyone, that deals with that. So go back, I think it's like episode 5, 6, or 7. But Michael, what do you say to people right now that are concerned about virtual assistants with their English skills?
Well, 2 things. I found that in office, on the ground staff had too much of a sensitive relationship with the tenants that they put in, because they were invested. They put them in there and they felt like, they didn't want to upset the apple cart. And so for them, they were happy to kind of wait a few days before they started to kind of get anxious. A lot of in-office staff do get levels of anxiety when doing rent arrears because they don't want to upset the tenant. They're worried about repercussions. But having like the support staff that were doing it, there was no entitlement because I put you in the property and now things are going wrong. It was happy. When you're talking about English, I mean, Darren, how many of our team have got bad English? I mean, like, they just wouldn't make it. They wouldn't make the cut if that was an issue. Killing them with kindness, and the serial rent offenders, I kind of enjoyed. I enjoyed that. It was a bit of it was fun because it's who's going to break first. It's not a question of when, it's not a question of if, sorry, it's when, because they all break because their frustration gives in and you're giving them all these different options and then you're showing them what can happen, and then it just, they're going to move out.
They just fall into line or they leave. And
But if you think it's going to be like a one-shot approach to fix the serial people, it's not. That's why it didn't take me overnight to do it. It took me time to kind of work the craft. And again, Darren, like exactly what I did, I've helped numerous offices reduce their rent arrears consistently.
Yeah. And you have. I know that you have, and you're very, very good at that. And everyone out there, again, I honestly believe that rent arrears or people being behind in the rent contribute to 70% directly and indirectly of a rental department's issues. If you want to really calm things down and get chaos well under control, you've got to master your late rent. Now, Michael, I think this is probably worth a phone call for people to get in touch with you just on this point and how to train a virtual assistant to do that, because I think that 90% of dealing with rent arrears, or even 99.9%, is right in that initial phone call. So what's the best way for people to get in contact with you if they want to chat to you about making that happen with a virtual assistant?
Yeah, just go to teamsbydesign.com and contact us and drop us a line, and we'll book in a time to have a chat. And you know, rent arrears is one part of the business, but it shouldn't. Your relationship shouldn't be at the rent arrears. It's really got to be. We talk about contacting your landlords frequently and no reason calls. You need to be communicating with your tenants throughout the tenancy, because they feel as though the world is against them when they're in a tenancy, and a lot of them feel like they're on the back foot. If you start early on, you know, someone moves into a property, call them a week or 10 days after they've moved in, check in and see how they're going, anything you can help them with. And throughout the 12 months or however long the lease is, look after them, be nice to them, do random acts of kindness to them, because you'll get so much out of them, right? They'll be so accommodating to changes and working with you. And if there's any issues, you know, they're not on the back foot. Oh, Darren didn't do this. Dennis didn't do this for me. Communicate. And this helps any future issues with rent arrears, communication. They're not afraid to talk to. And we have VAs that do that, right? They call up on the 7 and 10 days. They call up after maintenance. They call up and just check how everything's going proactively. Hey, Darren, no reason for the call. How's the property going? Good, great. You know, anything you need to report to me? No maintenance, anything? Okay, perfect. I'm glad. You know, we've got the routine coming up in a few months. We'll see you then.
I think that's great. I think, again, just confirming everyone, all of the focus and everything goes into that initial first one day that the tenant hasn't paid their rent. That's where all the resource and phone calls go. But let's just say, Michael, because you're working with a lot of offices, helping them reduce their rent arrears. Let's just say one tenant doesn't pay, and now we've got SMSs to be sent, emails to be sent. We've got forms that need to be served. How can a virtual assistant help with that? Particularly with these regulated forms, each state has different forms that have to be exact, different counting, all of those sort of things. How can a virtual assistant be involved with that process if one does get through the net?
Yep, and there's a time and a place for SMS and emails and things like that. Choose your weapon appropriately, right? I wouldn't send a text message to start with, because a lot of text messages that agencies send get ignored, especially when you've got booking platforms that send all these SMS. They're so impersonal. A phone call, checking up on them is a lot better. But as far as, you know, we have our team have access to like SMS broadcast, SMS Central, the SMS platforms on the property portals, right? So it's okay to send a message, but just choose the weapon appropriately and accordingly. Sending notices, whatever is the government legislative requirement for issuing rent arrears, it's the same. There's a simple text that you write. You know, you are X amount in arrears with X amount in credit on account, and you are, and so on. That's easy to do. Serving notices is easy to do. Like, it's step by step, and it's legislative.
And as long as if you're teaching someone to do a form, you just screen record it, show them exactly how it must be done. And of course, if they're creating the forms for you, property manager checks it before it goes anywhere. So at least 90% of the workload's been done by a virtual assistant, and the property manager doing the quality check as well before that form is served. That's just, good practice as well. So Michael, I think we've covered a lot of good stuff there. And for everyone, look, virtual assistants don't just do rent arrears. They can do up to 80% of your team's workload. And just go to teamsbydesigntasks.com. That's teamsbydesigntasks.com. Download our list there of 30 different tasks they can be doing. And of course, get in touch with Michael, have a chat to him about the late rent or the rent arrears system, particularly around those calls, how virtual assistants can be doing them. He did mention, Michael, that if they don't have good English skills, well, they generally don't make the cut anyway to your team, because you're approving up to only about 10% of applications that come to you, because we've got a lot of people in the Philippines applying. I know that we've got a really good machine and a process to make that happen. So a big thank you, Michael. And get in touch with Michael through teamsbydesign.com if you have any questions at all. But thanks, everyone, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.